On opening government, we have IIT Bombay, high-pass filter. On opening opposition, we have IIT Bombay, Krittika. On closing government, we have IIT Bombay 2008 bonds are also here with something. And on closing opposition, we have Vivek jeetke mission milega. Congratulations for the team for making it to the finals once again. Couple of housekeeping rules. Take POIs, be nice with each other, and try to be funny if you can. Otherwise, we'll get. Prime Minister, here.
Preferably, please use the mic. Thank you.
A couple of shout outs before I begin. This is my first Open Grand Final. I've been debating for less than a year, and this has only been possible due to the support and the kind of guidance that I received from a lot of members of the IIT Bombay DepSoc. I can't go and list all of them, but just a huge thank you to the IIT Bombay DepSoc and the wider debating community in particular for supporting new debaters in what is a really competitive and really challenging sport. Secondly, thank you to my family for supporting me in a sport that is so random to do for an engineer and so time consuming to do for an engineer, something that does not benefit me academically. And also to the lovely IIT Bombay freshies who are here in full support for giving a huge sense of community and for being a ray of hope for the entire DepSoc and for the wider debating world in general. So thank you. Thanks a lot. I'll be starting on my next word. Two clean impacts from opening government. Firstly, the Gujarat model increases the scale and level of employment for vastly more people belonging to vulnerable classes of society. And secondly, this brings in more foreign direct investment, which benefits vastly larger number of stakeholders. Firstly, a clarification. We are speaking about preferring one model over the other, which means we don't necessarily like to defend the way this model has played out in Gujarat. We need to defend why this model is structurally likely to work better as opposed to the competing model. Following that, with a few pieces of characterization. What does the Gujarat model look like? Firstly, we believe it is characterized by government-sponsored investment drives. What do these investment drives look like? This looks like advertising to corporations who seek to invest, that there will be tax benefits given to them. There will be benefits given to them in form of setting up special economic zones where they're able to operate with more autonomy and more convenience. Secondly, it means advertising the ease of doing business in this particular state by firstly fostering a growth of startup culture, because startup culture is necessary as governments are incentivized to bring in more talented graduates from top universities and more talented graduates from various colleges and so on, and they're attracted to the dynamism that the startup culture brings to the table, but also by relaxing certain barriers that pose as barriers to entry for various new firms to come in. Why do we then believe that multiple sectors and multiple companies will be engaged as opposed to a few big corporations? Firstly, multi-sector development is simply beneficial for the government as it engages a far larger scale and number of voters in the first place, which means once you develop multiple sectors, once you bring in companies from multiple sectors, multiple voter classes and multiple voter segments are engaged in the first place through this development model, which is why multiple companies are likely to be incentivized to come in the first place. But also because favoring a particular company is likely to favoring a particular corporation is likely to invite backlash, firstly from opposition parties, but secondly also from the commercial competitors that these companies have, which is why we believe multiple companies are likely to come in the first place. Which also means that the burden of development in the Gujarat model now shifts away from the state and more into the private partners, which means the state can can spend more on things like welfare schemes. The state can spend more on things like schemes that guarantee people social security and so on. The Kerala model, by contrast, faces three key problems. Firstly, it entails a state control on various aspects of society. It entails like things like humanitarian development and the entire burden of human development as well as commercial development being put on the state. Secondly, it means that services such as healthcare services and so on are also reliant on the state, along with the kind of burden of commercial development, because any state needs both. It needs commercial development as well as humanitarian development. And it also means that bureaucratic delays and approvals and the entire process of taking approvals is a structural feature of development in the first place. Coming then to my first argument, why this increases the scale of employment. Firstly, why is employment not presented on the comparative? Firstly, understand that opportunities for employment for people to go ahead and seek employment on the comparative are less, because insofar as the state directly prioritize like human development at the ground level, it is likely to invest less in the commercial development of the state in the first place. It's a simple opportunity cost, which means that scale the rate at which development occurs is slow, which means you have less newer corporations coming up, which means you have less employment opportunities coming up in the first place. But secondly, understand that the pay scales that the state government provides, or like the one of the primary employers in the counterfactual being the state, the kind of pay scales that the state government provides, or the kind of pay that like the scales of pay that the state government provides, are updated at vastly slower rates and slower rates and through a vastly long bureaucratic process, which means that the market reacts to the changing situations all around the world, and especially the changing local situations at a much slower rate, which provides a clear disincentive for you as an average person to go ahead, because you might see your savings evaporate just because your salaries haven't increased at the same rate. On our comparative, we believe that the opportunities of development are more and the dynamism is simply more. Firstly, because now that you have multiple corporations coming in, now that the state is actively incentivizing investment, corporations that set a base in these states are likely to require a pool of workers, which means they firstly go ahead and advertise opportunities to work, but secondly, they go ahead and probably carry out targeted recruitment drives in schools and colleges of the state. They carry out targeted recruitment drives for blue collar workers because they need a workforce to go ahead and set up these factories in the place, which means the rate of development being more increases the amount of employment. But also the market dynamism that comes in due to this aggressive industrialization is something that is likely to make like your paycheck and your salary respond much more fluidly to the conditions that you face, the economic conditions that you face. But secondly, understand that now the government also has incentive to government and corporations also have other incentives for recruitment drives that increase the scale of employment. Firstly, there is anti-migrant sentiment in states. What this necessarily means is to counteract against backlash coming from this anti-migrant sentiment, government and companies are likely to incentivize people from their local area to come in and seek employment in the first place. This is a direct electoral incentive as well as a direct incentive to compete against this anti-migrant sentiment. But secondly, we believe that the opportunities that are coming in the first place through this kind of aggressive industrialization are likely to be more lucrative in nature, which is why this increases the scale of employment in the first place. What are the impacts of this scale of employment? Firstly, this reduces the pain of families who live paycheck to paycheck, because now you have people who are able to access employment at a much easier rate, people who have a lower barrier to go ahead and access employment, which means you have more parents who can pay the school fees of their children. You have an easier access to healthcare because you have more salaries that you can use to go ahead and purchase medicines and so on, which means that the comparative where access to healthcare and so on are primarily in the hands of the government, where commercial development is not as prioritized by the government in the first place, is something that we believe is simply worse off in this case. Before I move on to more FDI, POI. We believe that there is an inherent incentive for two structural reasons I've already mentioned, why multi-sectoral development is necessary, why an engagement with multiple actors and a positive competition developing results in more voter engagement, which is an incentive to have multiple companies come in and invest in your country. We don't believe that is so easily likely to be the case. But finally, why does this bring in more foreign direct investment? FDI is likely to be lower on the comparative because of two reasons. Firstly, once the state has this binary onus of developing both humanitarian things as well as going ahead and developing commercial things, we believe that this discourages investment in the first place, whereas because of things like red tape and because of people being unwilling to invest in over-leveraged state-owned enterprises, whereas on our side, access to credit is much larger because this rapid industrialization creates an image of growth potential, which makes credit rating agencies rate these companies higher, which increases the access to credit and thereby increases the foreign development investment in the first place. But secondly, it also increases the competitive cooperative incentive among various financial firms and various financial institutions to go ahead and invest in this so-called in this highly developing area in the first place. We believe the ROI is also likely to be better because firstly because of the on their side they have to go through a lengthy process of approvals. They also have policy inconsistency as when the parties flip, the policies change, and so on and so forth. Whereas on our side, we have a better return on investment, which simply causes better FDI to come in and flow into the market. For all these reasons, extremely proud to win from opening government.
Just a couple of quick shout outs before I start. Unlike Vihang, I haven't just been doing this for a year. I've been doing this on and off for a few years now, which is why it amazes me all the more to see how many incredibly talented freshies are here with us today. I can't wait to see a lot of them up on this stage in upcoming comms, and I can't wait to see what they do with the platform we're set up. And secondly, to everyone, I'm not going to take names, but to everyone who's actually made sure that I didn't retire last year, any of the hundreds of times I tried to, thank you so much. I'll start with my first word. Give them bread and circuses while actually ignoring the problems that plague them at the very core, that would deny them the access to actually rise up socially in the long term, is the fundamental crux of OG's case, and is the reason why the case completely falls apart. The entirety of OG's paradigm is so short-termist because it focuses on short-term development without actually giving people the ability to learn skills and get educated and build social security nets that enable them to move upward socially in the long term. But before that, a bit of framing. Countries like India have massive amounts of poverty. It's not, most people in these nations are not going to be able to access the majority of the benefits that their jobs and their industrialization are posing. What they need mostly is first education. There are people who don't know how to read or write. There are people who don't know how to do 1 + 1 = 2. How are they going to take any meaningful benefit out of the jobs that are going to be created by the Gujarat model? They need healthcare to make sure that they're not dying every time they get injured on this job, and to make sure that they can build some kind of social security. We don't disagree that development and jobs and investment are necessary. The question now remains, what should you prioritize in the short term to ensure the best long-term benefit for your state? We believe that by prioritizing social progress in the form of education, in the form of land reforms, in the form of healthcare benefits for the people, you will better prepare them to take advantage of the same kind of development that the Gujarat model proposes in the long term. Two basic arguments then. Firstly, why is it that in the Gujarat model, the trickle-down effect never happens, and the largest number of people, the intensely poor people who are extremely deprived and extremely discriminated against, never actually get any of the benefits that they try to flip? Firstly, voters don't understand what they're voting for. You cannot just argue this debate in debate land. You have to look at what actually has happened when this model has been utilized. Without fair access to education, without fair access to social reforms to make sure that constant social unrest and communal tensions don't exist, voters have no incentive or ability to understand the policies that the ruling party is suggesting. Yes, voters want development. Yes, they want job creation, but they need to understand which kind of development do they want most, and which party is providing that to them, and B, they need to understand how to actually gain access to the development to make sure that the development that's being created isn't actually just benefiting the top 1% of the society, and it's actually trickling down to them where they can actually get benefits from this, right? So what ends up happening in their model is, without the kind of social progress that the Kerala model proposes, people are never going to understand which party to vote for. They're never going to be able to gain access to the benefits of their development. Why is this so important? People clearly aren't, yes, jobs are an issue, but people need meaningful jobs, and to get meaningful jobs you need to get the kind of education and skill to take benefit of the job. At best, in their model, the kind of jobs that are going to be available are short-term jobs like construction and labor and running a factory floor, which is something that cannot really give you much upward social mobility, because you're not going to earn much money out of doing it, and you're not going to get any long-term skills or education. What the actually meaningful jobs that this provides is only going to go to the top 1% of the state, which has been privileged enough historically to actually obtain the kind of skills and education needed to perform them. And even if if the state is so bad off that those top 1% themselves barely exist, what these companies and businesses will eventually have to do is bring in workers from outside to fill in those actually meaningful jobs. Because if the people of the state are not educated enough to understand how to perform, how to work as a consultant, or how to actually work in the tech related job, if you are not be able to provide them with education to access these higher tier jobs, they're going to be blue collar workers forever. They're going to be building the factories and building the offices that then the rich and privileged and wealthy from other states are going to come into and take advantage of and earn more money. Secondly, why does this lead to more benefit actually going towards the big corporations and not as much towards the small few? I know that Vihang talked a lot about how there's going to be lots of how there's going to be how multiple different sectors are going to be incentivized to invest into here. But why is it that more likely than not, it's just going to be a few big companies that end up making the most benefit out of this? Just because there are multiple sectors that are being industrialized does not mean multiple companies will be in each of those sectors. We can see in clear, broad daylight what happens in our own country, in this own state, that a few mega conglomerates which have businesses in different sectors end up capitalizing on this. The government isn't just going to be like, isn't just going to throw money at anyone who wants to invest in these businesses. They're going to hand out contracts to industrialize these places and set up their business here. And when they do so, they're much more incentivized to hand out these contracts to big conglomerates whom A, they've worked with in the past and know they have a friendly relationship with, but also B, who can actually take the load of taking on the largest number of industries and sectors without needing much governmental investment. Because if you want startups to start up, each of these startups is going to need separate individual funding of a much higher caliber than what a big conglomerate like the Adani Group or Ambani Group is going to need. So what inevitably will happen is the government wants to look good to the voters by providing development, but they also don't want to spend too much money on this. So what they will do is they will provide this money they will provide a smaller amount of money to big conglomerates like Adani or Ambani, who can start up industrialization and these businesses in various different parts of the market, while startup culture and whatnot is not going to grow meaningfully. They're not going to benefit from that. Yeah. They can come, sure, but what are you going to do when Adani is using economies of scale and the massive amount of a head start he already has to capitalize on the market? You have to prove why these new firms coming in are actually able to compete with the governmentally subsidized and supported firms like Adani and Ambani. But even if that you do manage to prove that, like we said, we want to focus on the long term. We want to make sure that the voters are empowered to gain access to these better jobs. I'm repeating this again to emphasize how important it is. No amount of development can ever take a country upwards socially unless the people of the country are educated and provided with the basic social security nets. It's after 6 minutes. Come on, basic security nets that they need to live a comfortable life. Right? Unless the voters are able to understand which party is providing what kind of development, what kind of policies, and pick and choose what they feel is most beneficial to them, and they're never going to be able to rise above the constant bickering that occurs in the lower class of society, while the rich and wealthy like Ambani and Adani capitalize on their suffering and just exploit them and give them shitty low tier jobs while making the government look good because they're providing development. OG's world is one where the government just uses these big corporations to look good and stay in power while keeping the people poor and idiotic and not being able to really catch them on their lie. Don't pick OG's world. The Kerala model is superior. Proud to oppose.
Yeah. So I'm Ojas. I'm going as DPM. Before I begin, a couple of shout outs. Like this is my first finals as well, and like it has been a year since I've been debating, and like basically 1 year ago I was attending DB 101 sessions at IITB, and like Mahor kind of sold debating to me, and I was like, okay, I want to become like this guy one time, like at one point in the future. And although I'm still a far like I'm still quite far away from that. Like it feels really great to be in the same room with him and like debate with these guys. It's a really and thank you to all of like to the entire IITB DepSoc for like this has been a big part of my life for the past year, and I've enjoyed a lot with this circuit. Yeah. That said, I'll start my speech on the reverse count of 3, 2, and 1. Why the extent of development is uniquely better on our side? Firstly, I'll like extend on that. Firstly, high public spending on education or healthcare is an opportunity cost. That means that you necessarily deprioritize development, you necessarily invest less time into development. Employment is also more important as a vehicle of social mobility. Like this directly engages with O, because education without likelihood of employment leads to people opting out of education in the first place. Like if they are not going to get jobs, what is the use of them getting education? This also creates a migration problem, which is a long-term harm because people migrate to states with more employment, which leads to brain drain, manpower drain, which is bad for your state as a whole. But this is also bad for migrants who are probably like coming into your state to like work for your state, because this they also face backlash, which means your state never develops because there is like no one to there are no opportunities and there is no developing happening. Firstly, again, another clarification: this motion is set in the like entire world in general, not like in a developed or developing state necessarily. So your arguments also need to be valid in both places. Now, opposition says that only industry giants like Ambani and Adani benefits, and like there is a lot of favoritism and whatnot. Firstly, governments might be non-ideal, but they aren't completely hell-bent on embezzling money. Some call out and like basically some call out on accountability mechanisms still exist through social media and public backlash, through electoral backlash, which means there exist some checks and balances. But even if we completely choose to accept that only a few select companies get preferences, it is still going to be better overall for societal development, because if an industry giant is monopolizing a sector and investing heavily in one particular state, that industry giant wants massive return on investment from that state, which means you necessarily invest a lot of money. If you're being preferred by the government, you capitalize on it, you invest a lot of money into it. What this means is you invest into a state, like it is also difficult to outsource everything from in a particular state, right? It is easier to train a bunch of locals to work at your company for a long term. It's a long term investment, which makes you like, which is more profitable, because like outsourcing talent is unsustainable, like cost wise, logistics wise, but also leads to backlash from voters because of at the point if industrialization does not give benefits and jobs to locals, even if they are like completely stupid as O says, they will still give backlash to the government because they are not that stupid, right? If they are not getting jobs, they are going to be pissed off at them, and like this exists, like this is a direct electoral incentive for the government. So what this means is like you necessarily have a lot of investment, and this also leads to building more factories, whatever, and you also outsource a lot of tasks like transportation or manufacturing or multiple other things you rely on, like rely on smaller companies for, which means irrespective of whether you have multiple large corporations or a single large corporation, the need for multiple smaller companies to support them for their like basic operations still exists on either side, because no single company can do everything single-handedly, and it is these small service providers and companies which are responsible for generating a huge amount of employment for the masses. So that happens on gov with certainty, like irrespective of whether you have a large corporation or multiple large corporations. So yes, maybe companies profit a lot, but so does the public. I'm happy with it. Then moving on. Now, if people have more jobs, people also have more money necessarily. If people have more money, a market exists for products and services. If you have more shops, like basically this means you have more shops and more service providers coming in, which again generates more employment. But also this means that services like healthcare, education, etc., which you are talking about, which are responsible for human development as a whole, also have an incentive to come here through the private sector, because demand for those services exists here, and people like basically have the capacity to afford them, which is more efficient than the government, because you have multiple service providers, you have more like basically expertise between spread across these multiple companies, and they have like basically they're just more efficient than the government, which is a single actor and has a lot of constraints, right? So this is better for social development as a whole. Notice that a massive scale of industrialization is the only way to provide jobs to all vulnerable communities. You can basically, so they can basically access these services to at least some extent on side government, as opposed to like basically getting nothing out of it on side opposition. But even if you claim that such services remain largely inaccessible for certain sections of society, the government can easily provide these to them, as you have a much smaller amount of people to cater to on our side, because a lot of people are getting other jobs and they can like afford services like by themselves, right? And on your side, what happens is, since there is no industrialization, you basically this private sector development does not happen, which means the government has to take care of everyone, which is just unsustainable in the future, right? So what this means is you like basically you also have more money flowing in for the government, because you have a lot of industrialization, which means you also have greater capacity to like provide these services in the first place. But beyond that, employer also usually provide some benefits like healthcare or education for their employees, which further reduces the load on all of these systems, and which is a much better benefit on our side. Before I move on, QI from closing. Wonderful. Okay, so human development is done by government on your side. The reason and like the problem with it is probably not profitable for any company or business, which means that you invest solely as the government into this thing with limited resources, with limited capacity, like limited amount of experts, but also a lot of bureaucratic red tape. Plus, it is the like basically the government which is doing managing everything, as opposed to these tasks being probably divided on government and the government also being involved as an actor. Like you have multiple actors who are doing the same thing here, so it is much more divided on our side, which is better in the long run. So the development you suggest is very sluggish, it is underfunded, and more importantly, to see any sort of ROI on this model, it takes many years and decades, because you need to first set up like strong, efficient government institutions, which in itself is improbable because the government has a lot of bureaucratic red tape. There exist a lot of like lots of avenues for corruption, and even then to develop, because you also like you all know that, right? And even then to develop society through education and by elevating their social capital or whatever takes a lot of time. If you have a lot of illiterate people, it takes these people years to like actually get educated enough, like for the standard of society to actually get uplifted enough. And now what happens is, once you uplift this section of society, they simply have no jobs to go to because you never invested in development of the region in the first place, which means that you are necessarily going to have brain drain. These people are going to go to other states to get jobs, to get employment, which means your state never benefits in the end, because whatever people you are training by investing resources on the government are just going and utilizing these resources for the development of some other state, which in an like which is like stupid as a whole for the state, because it leads to no development and it's just a vested cost which leads to no return on investment. So what this means is, moreover, like I already said, the benefits are intangible, right? Like basically the benefits of like on opposition are intangible. If you are like investing in education and social upliftment, that doesn't really yield results in 1 year. It means that people also do not invest in this model. Like people are not really people are not very trusting in this model, like because they need some sort of short-term benefits to keep them satisfied. Because like you yourself tell me that people like need some sort of short-term incentives and benefits to vote for the government, which exists on either side of the house, which means that even on off, the government needs to do something, like show like probably fake figures or try to fake progress on either side of the house, like on their side as well, which means that we are like they say we are short-termists, like basically the government needs to show some sort of short-term development to these people on their side also, which means that the government is likely to deviate from the long-term overall structural development plan to satisfy these people as well, which means the implementation of this entire program as a whole is going to be extremely horrible and leads to nothing, because you are not invested enough in this long-term development plan, because you necessarily also have to keep people satisfied in the short term, which means that you are not invested enough in the like basically the development path as a whole. On opposition, you educate people to understand how to like make good choices. You tell them how to make good choices. The problem is the choices don't exist on their side. We at least give them choices to like basically opt into, and that is, I think, a more certain and more like beneficial impact for everyone.
Afternoon. Tejas, I'll be going as a DLO. Uh, to begin with, a few shout outs to the people who really matter. Start with obviously a huge thank you to the IIT Bombay DevSoc community for really merging this culture of debating and really bringing up years and years of debating from the grandpas like Mahor to children like these. It's really beautiful to see people flourishing so well, and especially freshies getting inspired to do even better, right? That's really nice to see. In addition, obviously, thanks to Surya for carrying my ass to the finals. And yeah, also thanks to Janani and Rail for fixing my drip so I can send a nice pic to my mom. Nonetheless, so I think we can start here. Just give me a half a second. Okay. Hi, I hope I'm audible well. I'll start my speech in three, two, one. Panel, the government and the entire debate has forgotten who the single most important stakeholder is in this debate, right? It is not the state, it's not the political party, the companies, it is the people who matter and whose lives inequality is the single most detrimental factor is the entire debate, which we will establish exclusively on our side of the house. To begin with, the rebuttals for the entire opposition government case, right? The Gov case, simply the Gujarat model will improve scale and employment for the people and it improves foreign direct investment. To entire bunch of reasons why this does not actually materialize. Panel, understand that to begin with, the government model is structurally flawed, considering that the fact they never proved to to you why any of these benefits will actually materialize. Just because you are the state prioritize investment does not imply why companies will come and invest in you. And my L already showed you abundantly why they will actually not. Thereafter panel, understand that our case is infinitely stronger since we are logically prior to everything the government ever does and accomplishes. My leader very well proves to you a foreign investment will literally occur not in Gov side and actually occur on our side of the house, right? Lastly, panel, we win this debate by a landslide since every little clash goes our way and all the infinite harms of Gujarat model and benefit of Kerala model are for the people are never taken down or even attempted by the government sides, which takes us to the top. So nothing Gautam as grandfather can say will ever take them over us, all right? So yeah, panel, the government really thinks that employment matters more than literal baseline education because people are usually fucking poor and cannot afford private healthcare and education, right? This means that you are basically condemning the most vulnerable people to a lifetime of misery and labor jobs at best, right? Panel, even if there's a big ass factory, these people can only go back and work at the peon level, at the labor level, because they are not being invested on. They don't have the right resources to get educated, to get develop themselves, to get private healthcare. They don't have that, right? The companies, the people who employ them will have to provide these features to them, which the government simply never establishes. Thereafter, panel, even if there aren't enough jobs in Kerala, at least people are employable and smart, which means that in worst case, they can go to Bangalore and work, and best case, they can come back to Kerala and invest in the state, right? Again, call out mechanisms don't fucking work because the people are simply too stupid to understand in most cases what real development means. This is precisely why the countries with lowest literacy and human development are usually most corrupt and poor. BJP can fund Adani endlessly, but make some good Instagram reels showing off big factories on their side, and people will still vote for them because that's how brainwashing works. That's how mass elections work, panel. The government seems to fucking forget that, right? Then our impacting is huge in the long term because we educate a family and raise their bar, right? The standard of living and all future generations benefit immensely. This also means that smart people will come back and reinvest in future, and thereafter the state will develop organically. But this time, development will be accessible to the common man because people who get educated will come back and develop in Kerala, will come back and raise the standard of living for their family and their neighbors and so on. And this is something that never occurs on their side, right? Companies don't build societies, families do, and that is what we prove on our side exclusively, right? Prop case analysis, a bit of prop case for us, right? Few arguments. Hold on. Gujarat model gives no assurance of human impact since there is no direct association between Texas Instruments investing in factory in Gujarat and Gujarati people being able to take up the jobs, right? This is especially true since the government miserably fails to prove why citizens will be upskilled. That never happens. Kerala model ensures that impact reaches grassroots level and improves QL for everyone across the board. And for obvious reasons, since primary scope for funding HDI money is on the people. Huge impact on quality of life on the people on our side, which never accumulates the gov anyhow. Additionally, there is much increased scope for corruption since there is no fixed accountability for how this industrialization on gov side is going to occur in Gujarat model, which means the state can very conveniently cite the Gujarat model as their excuse for giving cheap land to Ambani and all because corruption will there be rampant, right? As a consequence, the only people benefiting from Gujarat model are the literal fucking big corporations, not the damn people. Panel, please understand. Also, we want the overall benefit of people, which only occurs through elected government, right? Without social progress and development, voters will remain educated, as my L already said. There will not be sufficient awareness and vigilance about what the government are good for them, especially because there is no investment directly in the people, which means that elections will largely be fought on communal and religious lines and such bullshit lines, which means actual development will never really stand a chance to occur. So whatever they are trying to tout, elections will simply make them fail because people who are voting, not voting on the basis of development, they're voting on random ass bullshit like what the BJP does in Gujarat, right? Yeah. Lastly, panel, understand that India is a largely poor country, but even in general, if they take the entire world, right, most people shut up. This means that a lot of them are not even educated and sensible inherently, right? Without human development, the national communal unrest and violence that perpetually exists in the society will continue to perpetuate the moment you refuse to invest in people and do invest in companies instead. Panel, in fact, understand that since the region is likely to be stable, for example, let's say Gujarat, it's not very stable. We have been repeated communal riots and shit like that. Since the workforce is unskilled and insecure, even companies will not want to invest in the damn state because the people are not in line with what's really happening, right? Most people are typically poor. Most people like this communal violence ongoing. The state is not very high on the development index. Even Gujarat is 25th on the HDI scale in India, which means that companies naturally don't have a reason to do this for any good reason, right? Companies will rather invest in a state where they can get a workforce of good employees. That's why Bangalore is a tech hub and not some fucking Gandhinagar, right? Please understand, panel. Please now understand. Again, on the other hand, in our side, in Kerala model, we begin at the grassroots and invest in every damn person. This is there is simply so much more quality to go around. And even in our worst case, if there aren't enough jobs, people can always migrate elsewhere to find jobs, which is the worst case we do. And thus, even a worst case beats the best case by a huge win. No, sit down. Mahor, go on. Sure, I agree with that. But the key part is the probability, right? Not all people are going to migrate. And to begin with, even if a fraction of them do and come back, the people who are actually staying back and investing in the state are the ones who are really being able to develop the state, right? There will be people eventually, when the workforce is good, who will come back and invest, who will start business and stuff in the state of itself. And again, panel, they're not engaging charitably with us. That's the worst case. Worst case is when the jobs are not really there. But again, as we proved to you, when government invest in the workforce, invest in the people, jobs will be created, businesses will flourish. Even FDI will come to us and not them, because the people are fucking dumb on their side of the house, right? Again, comparative impacts for why we win this debate, panel. We just showed you why our entire case stands strong in its entirety, and now here's why our impacts are biggest and we win this debate by a landslide. Panel, first, we demolished the entire Gov case by showing that all the benefits of FDI never materialize, because companies will simply never want to invest in such regions and states. And even if they do, since people are themselves poor and fucked in the ass due to underinvestment, they will not be able to take up good jobs. They will not be able to do the real work that uplifts their families. Social mobility is fucking absent on their side of the house, and therefore no real grassroots development occurs. Yes, companies spend more money, Ambani overtakes Tesla or whatever, but that's not what we really want per panel. Understand that that's not what we are aiming for, and therefore our side has more grassroots impacts. And even if we bite the bullet and some migration, the overall impacts on our side is much bigger, and obviously people are going to come back, right? This means that all the impacts of government and Mahor and Co already fall flat here, right away, right? Then our impacting is also used in the long run, because we educate a family and raise their bar, right? So the standard of living rises, and all future generations after that also benefit immensely. You educate one family, you educate the entire society perpetually as the generations go along. What this means is, in the long run, the state and its people will benefit the most, and that is the most crucial stakeholder in this debate. And therefore, we are very proud to oppose and win this debate. Thank you so much.
All right, one sec. So, I'm audible, right? Okay, cool. Firstly, I'd like to give the biggest shout out, the biggest thank you to Mahor for wanting to teaming up with me, because I wasn't even going to debate. I don't know. Maybe wanted to retire, but I'm pretty shit. But okay. But the point is, he gave me this opportunity, and this has taught me how shit I am and how much there is to learn. And this has just genuinely motivated me so much to go ahead and do it better, right? But also the fact that I've been debating for 3 years and I'm still so bad. The reason I still keep coming back is, I think, because of this depth talk. It's because of the fact that I see so many of my freshers, Sophies here, and it's genuinely giving me goosebumps to see all of you here cheering for me, right? I think I'm beyond grateful for this. And finally, I'd like to give the biggest shout out to my parents. Even though sometimes are tough, I think my parents have been so supportive for me throughout my whole life, and even now, that anything I will do now or later on or before is simply because of my parents. So I just want to give them the biggest shout out ever. Cool. All right. POI is from opening. All right, cool. After the 5th minute, and I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, and 1 sec. Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. 3, 2, 1, and go. I think the biggest problem with OG is that they simply fail to recognize as to where this debate is taking place, right? The point is that, I think the framing is that this is going to be in developing countries, because I think in developed countries, both already exist. And it's more about regulations to ensure that both are like keeping themselves in check. Whereas in developing countries, I think it has the biggest delta, because that is where, you would really want to develop. That is where aggressive infrastructure actually goes there and happens, or you try to make the people literate, right? Given that that is the case, I think it's important to contextualize developing countries here, right? Because a big part of today is that there is globalization. What this means is that the various parts of the supply chain which exist are largely like all over the place, right? Which means that like you can like the point is that every single developing country has some unique USP to them, which they go ahead and actually, is the reason why they actually are able to set up industries there. It might be because of some natural resources that are there or the labor that exists, right? The point is that you cannot simply create like smart people and expect that, oh, we're going to create the whole, like say, the supply chain here. We're going to create all industries here, right? I think it's more important that you cater to the small part of the supply chain that you value, right? Take the example of say something like Taiwan, where they simply have the like monopoly in terms of the chip manufacturing, and that is why they have such a big say market on whatever, right? So what I'm trying to tell you here is that simply making people educated is not going to help with the supply chain. Given that is the case, what do we really bring you here, right? At a point of which on our side of the house, we go ahead and tell you that we're going to lead to aggressive infrastructure or you're going to create deals with other people. I think the ball is in the private party's court, right? I think this is especially good because private parties understand what these the countries are good at and what these countries are bad at. What this means is they're going to create investment in these areas in their unique USP, right? What like some examples of this is something like say textiles, where in India the handcrafting textiles, etc., is something which is hugely, and the point is we don't really like say get clothes or whatever, we get it transferred from other ways, right? And understand that at a point at which you go ahead and invest in infrastructure, there's things like say transport, roads, etc., and say making even deals with other countries in terms of the raw materials exist, which are all things which happen on Gov side. Due to which I think these industries are simply going to get bigger and better, and this is something which is unique, which means that they're going to be able to capture more of the market at a point at which you're going to be able to transport it to a lot of places, right? And so that is one, but also two is the fact that, yeah, okay, that's it, right? But that's what makes it better. Given that is the case, let me also go ahead and tell you as to why we think that a big part of this debate is understanding that government is the one doing this, right? Which means that on which side of the house the government is able to better enact these policies is very important. What I mean by this is, on our side of the house, I think things such like aggressive infrastructure is and actually dealing with private parties means that the government is held more accountable. Because understand, on the counterfactual, that is the complete public undertaking in terms of say like the education and healthcare which exists. I think this is a big issue because just look at round one motion, right? Governments can do a lot of shitty things to ensure that they're able to increase their say literacy index or whatever. And this is why like say the performative development which exists on opposition is very high. Whereas on our side of the house, I think at a point at which you're dealing with private parties, it's like a two-way checking mechanism, right? At a point at which you're going to go ahead and give like these deals to these private parties. Private parties obviously are going to try and optimize for themselves because they want high profits. But also B is the fact that at a point at which the government is the one who's going to try and tell you like, oh, Geo, come and like build industries in my area or whatever. I think then the government has this sort of incentive to go ahead and make them in check, right? Because at a point at which they are coming in, like if you go ahead and like make sure that like do let the private companies bully whatever they want, I think simply voters are going to be simply mad at how they're right, if they're polluting the environment or whatever. Which means that there's this two-way check balances at a point at which you go ahead and let private parties enter. I think this is important because on op side they never actually proved to me as to why governments should do it in a good place, and it's something which OG also misses out on, right? So then I think that is especially important. Before that, POI opening, Okay, I think it's about being comparative, right? I think on opposition, it's like the public facilities which they are going to be undertaking, and I think at a point in which like corruption does exist, I think it's something which Vip will go on to say. I think on our side, the corruption which exists in terms of these infrastructure projects is going to be way lesser than say things like public education or healthcare. But it's also because understand that there's some things that are just more tangible to the people, right? I think it's tangible to the people to see that, oh, I built metro lines, oh, I built transport roads. But I think what's not tangible is what is actually health index, because I don't know what health index is, which means I don't know if people come in and just give out a random number. I don't know how that's going to affect people, right? Which means that on our side of the house, when you go ahead and make these infrastructure projects, I think the things which are just more tangible, which means that governments are going to be held more accountable. And if the government goes ahead and does not actually fulfill the promises of making roads better, I think these are the things which are going to lead to a lot more backlash. Due to which I think we on our side are going to be just way better off in terms of the state actor being good, right, or being made accountable, with something which again OG misses out on. But then finally, is that O's whole analysis is that if you make education, development is going to follow. The issue with this is very simple. They go ahead and tell me that, oh, they're going to migrate and they're going to get a good job. I simply have no reason to believe why they're going to come back, especially when developed countries have significantly better like services and they got significantly paid more when you are in the US or whatever, and you just have a better life, right? You have a better AQI, etc. Which means that I simply do not understand, except for like this sentiment as to why they would want to come back in the first place. So then what we are going to do is very simple. We're going to show you how development is the reason why you're going to go ahead and get better education, you're going to get better healthcare, and this trickle down is going to happen. Understand that things like say Geo coming in and setting up say like internet is something which simply a public sector can never do, because the public sector is simply uncompetitive at a point in which their source of revenue is taxes and not the people themselves, but also that the government jobs are just so lax that they're never able to go ahead and create innovation in the first place, right? And also understand that so that means that innovation is simply going to be way lesser, right? What that then tells me is the fact that you never, like, if a public undertaking is trying to make healthcare better, I simply don't see how that's going to happen. Whereas on us at the house, and also understand that when you have industries and infrastructure, there's things like say water, internet, etc., which are simply have to be made so that these industries work in the first place, right? What this does is by just like proximity, this is going to trickle down to the people, right? Which means that at a point it trickles down to the people. I think that is when people get the right exposure towards like what is there and what isn't there. I think they're going to, like, having just water at a cheaper rate, having like even the local industries that exist due to transport, due to being able to make deals, means that's going to be cheaper. All this, what this means is the fact that, and also understand that when you have bigger industries, you see a lot of the higher ups which you see, and you see the fact that, oh, there's actually merit in being educated. What this ends up meaning is the fact that on our side of the house, I think it's way more likely that parents are going to see the, like, say, worth at the point where they see innovation also. The parents are going to see the worth of actually educating their parents in the first place, right? Also understand that the point is that you have industries and you have a lot of people migrating, what do you say, educated people or whatever. I think there's naturally going to be a need for, say, things like schools to be built, because there are things that are going to be mandated, because otherwise industries will never want to come in the first place, right? What then ends up meaning is the fact that on our side of the house, we're going to actually go ahead and get education. We're going to go ahead and get better healthcare, because these are things which the industries are going to mandate. These are people like the higher ups are going to mandate, right? Given that that is the case, yeah. So so the impact is very clear. I think on our side, we're simply going to have better trickle down when you have private actors going ahead and doing this and mandating to the government to do what, like, to do this, right? And at that point, I think we're going to better have like better education, better healthcare, etc. For all those reasons, very proud to propose.
Short, sorry. I have a very specific thank you. It's very broad, but my thank you is to I've been doing this for about 2 years now, 3 years now, debating. I started because of a specific thrill that I used to get when I'm debating. This is only our second finals as a team, but I just want to give a shout out to kindness and the way that encapsulates it itself in this competitive sport. It's very toxic at times, it's very cutthroat at times, but the way that this at least breathes some air into your spirit, I want to give a shout out to that feeling. uh, So shout out on that is to my DepSoc, AUD DepSoc, juniors, my seniors that helped us. Shout out to my mother for being a very being the encapsulation of what I aspire to be in debate. And then shout out to a very specific Gwalior Dosa event that happened in some few past days. Yeah. Just waiting for my teammate. Yeah, he's pissing. What? Hey, they're whip, yaar. He's coming. What if I rent something else? Cool. I'm audible. So everyone, starting speech in three, 2 and 1. There is a very fundamental problem at both gov benches in this debate. Both of them assume that the way that this encapsulates is going to be in the most utopian ways, wherein companies are going to care about the consumers, when they don't care about predatory pricing, they don't care about cutting their costs, they don't care about maintaining their profits and their revenues, they don't care about the fact that they have to give salaries to employees, and they're going to do this in the most encapsulating scenario when they employ local people and they try to reverse brain drain. This is a fucking private company. This is not the government. This is not that you've elected. They want to maintain their profits. They're people that are not your saviors. We're very proud on closing opposition. Some responsibility I want to clear so that our extension makes sense in this debate. What is opening opposition case in this debate? Opening opposition is incomplete in crux because their only case is that education will somehow alleviate poverty. It will solve the crisis. We don't know what to do with this education. Both governments question them on the fact, why does education help people? Opening government points a fair question to them that education without employment is non-utile. It doesn't help people. If they're not creating a solution to this problem, opening opposition does not have a bottom line. What is then the opening government case? Opening government says that corporations are going to be good, states are slow, and there's going to be red tapeism. This is their only claim, unlike states are just bad. I would flip this. Just the fact that capitalism and the way that these private companies function is through predatory pricing, price gouging these areas, distorting the markets, lowering down the prices in order to make themselves more profitable, in order to increase their revenue. But also, they say that employment is important. Firstly, we don't know why employment is guaranteed to every local citizen. But their entire claims on both gov benches is that we want to maintain our profit, but we also want to maintain local, low-skilled workers. This is a logical fallacy, right? If you want to maintain your profits, you have to outsource it so that your revenues are there, you're more efficient as a company. Your local, low-skilled workers will not be able to help your company generate revenues. You need to invest into that. They will most probably not be investing into these areas. That is why these special economic zones only have to rely on FDIs. They don't rely on these local investments and stuff like that. Why is this? And then the CG case is that this gets better gradually. We still don't know why this gets better gradually. The scale of exploitation is much worse. They don't weigh out why exactly the housing crisis or the way that these companies can fail. Similarly, when the pandemic hits, when capital flight happens, when companies can leave these areas, they can just go away from here without any accountability. What happens then? What are these private companies? Why are they more accountable than the comparative? Two things on closing opposition. Firstly, why is public systems better and why are these housing facilities better? There are 4 things on this. We want to illustrate this for our impacts. Firstly, schools in the Kerala model are built on communal learning. They're built on the fact that your teacher is rapidly focused onto you. They're focused on community developments. They're more focused onto the fact that each and everyone in an egalitarian sense gets the ways that this education works. They focus on equity principles. And this is the way that these education are funded out in the Kerala model. Secondly, political systems are based on more accountability because your local MLAs and people are local leaders that are elected from you. They need to listen to these issues because you are the people that are important in these decentralized regional areas. This is the way that the Kerala model functions because they listen to the issues of these people, and the issues are wider on scale, right? Gender issues, the way that caste and class and race often encapsulate themselves in different forms, often require different kinds of perspectives. You can't focus them on into one bunch like private model, which both governments focus on. Thirdly, the way that this works on our side is a bottom to top approach, which is very simple for the comparative. The comparative on their side is a top to down approach wherein the trickle down needs to be explained for the impacts to even fall out. We don't get any explanation why the trickle down happens to the grassroots levels, why people on the local levels are better on both gov benches. Why is that the case? It's still my question to both govs. Some more harms that I want to posit onto govs. Firstly, rapid industrialization is not good because most probably, as both OG and CG say, this is just a capital accumulation and a project like that. They don't explain why the elites don't capture this similarly as they did, like Adani and Ambani captured all the projects through corporate lobbying, because this culture creates corporate lobbying wherein you want to become the first mover, you want to become the person who has those contracts, you want to exploit other small companies. The way that these fair rules also work is that they merge and acquire smaller companies that are trying to emerge. There is no innovation. There is no quality because both gov teams need to understand that they kill innovation by the fact that they can control these prices. Secondly, this approach is top to down. This exacerbates inequality more. They don't care about the rural and urban divide. They don't care about the fact that some people have to move to metropolitan cities and have to live in shitty houses like Mumbai, in Delhi, and have to go through like these kinds of things because they don't really care about the disparity or economic disparity that exists. They only care about the fact that the investors or the kinds of profit that have been generated in these special economic zones are more sustainable, and in that sense, they will get that. Thirdly, the fact that private healthcare is not even mentioned in the debate is just stupid, right? Pharma costs are highly inaccessible to the vast majority of people. They don't have any incentive to trickle it down to people at any point in time. They don't have any incentive to give out free drug supplies or subsidize their costs so that grassroots level people can have that. The comparative on our side is that the government needs to do this because it's a decentralized model. It's more regional. The pharma costs and the drug costs are subsidized at massive rates, which is the fact that these people can access that. The accessibility increases, and it's the way that this functions. Thirdly, I just feel like, and this is a second extension, the fact that you can't live in a city is a very crucial problem that people across genders, especially women and children, face. The fact that there are crime rates that increase because of the fact that the government does not check you, the fact that you have to morally police them, and the fact that you don't have ethics in people is a very big problem in states like Delhi that have specifically gone through this. Why does this problem exacerbate on that side? That is the case. And I said before I move on, open.
Local no-skilled workers are needed for most of the small jobs that don't require specialization. For every engineer you import, you still have more people who are employed in the factory.
Brother, we live in an age wherein automation is laying off people at a massive scale rate. These companies have the same incentive to do that. Why the fuck do they need an IT sales operator when they can automate these jobs? Capital flight is a real problem. These companies don't really care about you. They also want to generate their profits. They will lay you off. They don't care about employment security benefits. You are just an asset to them who wants to generate profit. It's relative to that. Why does the model on our side, on our second extension, have much more better safety and security? Notice the way that these regional system works. Your local leaders are much more accessible. The way that these women or like people face, they don't have any roads, there are potholes, they have to fix street lights, are more accessible in the sense that they can voice out these issues, and they don't have to go through that amounts of red tapeism that opening government just asserts. This is the way that we solve these crises. This is the way that the bottom to like top approach works on our side. Why is this so important? Because social security makes these cities livable. It attracts more people. It attracts more kinds of people to come in, and there's a more diverse pool of applicants and the people that we live over there. This increases the kinds of quality that you can get in jobs in the way that these companies can be attracted. But the way that this functions is that the government controls this and massively subsidizes on a decentral level. Panel. Closing opposition has one claim. Don't let this capitalistic, hyper-capitalistic idea take you over. We're very proud.
I'll keep my shoutouts really short. I feel incredibly loved, incredibly grateful for all my juniors that are here, all of you that mentioned me in your shoutouts, all of the love. It's just an incredible feeling. I'm so proud of everything that I've saw. I am so proud of the fact that 3/4 of this is an IIT Bombay mock in the final, and just amazing. And big shout out to GSK. He agreed to team up with me. It wasn't the other way around. I begged him that please, bhai, koi hai nahi kar le. And he agreed to team up with me. And we made it all the way here. So just one last speech to go. Huge shout out to GSK. And I'll be beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. CG just went to a garden, found a bunch of birds, plucked them, put them in their basket, and made a case out of it. Here is where CG goes wrong, and they don't analyze anything to more than a 20% degree. First, they start with why these companies are bad. Predatory pricing, price dodging, capital flight, and like some other random words. None of these are explained. I don't even know what they mean. And the bigger problem with that is that they just assume capitalism equal to bad, and because everyone is a woke person, they'll just believe this for the matter of fact. It's not true. But secondly, is that they've dodged the biggest bullet, which is that making profit is everyone's incentive. It's I also want to make a profit from this tournament. Every single corporation wants to make a profit. Everyone wants to do it. Making a profit doesn't automatically make you evil and doesn't automatically mean that you exploit people and that you harm them. The way in which people's assessment of who can do better and who can do worse is assessed in this debate is simply on the one clash of accountability. Who is able to ensure that funds are not siphoned to a large degree? Who is able to ensure that the work that's been allocated and that's been specified out from all of the wonderful analysis that OG gives actually happens, comes from CG's case, and I'm going to prove how. But I'll deal with CO with my speeches because I don't feel like they're the first or second biggest threat. Now, let's come to opening government and what they go ahead and bring in this debate. The first thing opening government says is that, okay, there is a source for you to go ahead and get employability. And the reason that this employability is generated is because you're able to get these large scale industries that go ahead and create jobs. And the challenge that comes from opening opposition and closing opposition as well is why is it done in a good way and why are these jobs actually created? A couple of things that we do here and a third thing I'm going to add. First thing is that we think that the accountability on our side is significantly better. The way in which we prove this is to say that when you go ahead and enter partnerships where you have to privatize the action completely, we think that the accountability goes ahead and shifts to the private players. The incentive and the capacity of private players to circumvent forms of accountability is significantly lower. Here is why. Capacity-wise, firstly, we think that the state has access to a lot of more media and machinery control. They have access to go ahead and change narratives. Private actors don't have the capacity to go ahead and do it, which means that if they do fall in trouble, then there is no way for them to get out of it. Secondly, their stock price is extremely vulnerable. The state can go ahead and change the narrative again in the next 3 years, but the stock price of the company is extremely unforgiving and they cannot go ahead and have any way in which they get exposed. But the third thing is that we think that despite the accusations from opposition that we don't really materialize how this manifests, we tell you that in developing countries, the way in which this happens is really simple. On opposition side, you go ahead and allocate this development to states and states that are entering into agreements with extremely large corporations that go ahead and help them to do this like various PSUs or like whatever industry you want to talk about. The problem with this is that the state can use all of its machinery to do all of the problems as highlighted on our side. But on the comparative, the state is only involved in providing them with probably the initial pricing of the land and the permits in the start. We think that is still damage because the state is corrupt, but that's far less ability to do damage as opposed to when you delegate this development to the state. And their side has a double jeopardy because you're not just delegating this development to the state, you're also delegating things such as education, such as healthcare to the state that can go ahead and use this in very, very bad ways. How does the state use this in bad ways? And why, even if we assume that the state is equally corrupt on both sides, the metric and the deadlock to break this is where they have more avenues to exploit their corruptive powers. Why do they have more avenues on opposition to go ahead and do this? Firstly, we think that when you enter into agreements with private actors, you not just outsource the work that these private actors have to do, but all the downstream impacts that come from that. Like let's say you are outsourcing. Let's take the pharmaceutical example. You are outsourcing the initial stages of pharma manufacturing, which is procuring all of the chemicals and making them according to the pharmaceutical standards and sterilizing them. If you are outsourcing that to an MNC, and then there are Indian companies that are doing the packaging of the goods and then are selling it to pharmaceutical stores. All the Indian companies that are doing packages, all the Indian companies that are pharmaceuticals on the road reduce their prices now because the cost of acquiring the goods in the first place has become cheaper. And this is crucial. Why? Because we think that this means the state is not involved in providing welfare schemes to these people. The state is not involved in this, it's not responsible for providing the equipment for these people because this is a process that takes away the state's the dependence on the state for these individuals. But the second way in which this happens is we think that the state in a large majority of instances when it comes to education and healthcare and things like that also does this by going ahead and entering into partnerships with heavy and large private players to go ahead and execute their final erstwhile stuff, which means that all of those are sources of siphoning and corrupting of this money. Why is this necessarily the most important in the context of a developing nation? Because all four houses in this room have agreed on one thing and one thing only, which is that the state is inherently corrupt, and that the ways in which you can increase the power of the state, you cycle this to a problem over time. Because then we think that you cannot, if a state is corrupt and is able to siphon more money and machinery, they're able to control and retain that power as well. And this is the problem that's happening with India right now. Just saying Adani and Ambani does not suffice, because we think that the problem is the number of avenues of corruption that you're able to create, and that's happened because of different issues. In India, we have not followed the Gujarat or the Kerala model. We have followed a mix of it, and Adani and Ambani have come up because of different issues, and all of that is off clash. Opening.
If you want to ensure accountability, how are you going to get that if people don't know how to point out problems in the current policy and call out the government or private actors on that?
Okay, couple of things. Firstly, is the kind of problems that people face do not need you to be fucking educated about the problems. They are not the CO2 content in my lungs. They are simply how much I'm earning, what are my work hours, what are the kind of rights I have, which are the kind of people I can appeal to, which are the kind of local municipality, whatever, that are willing to listen to me, and all of this stuff. Which means that education and rocket sciences, I mean, O is just out. Why am I agreeing? Like, why am I contesting with them? Second thing that OG said is FDI. The biggest problem with OG on FDI is that it's such debate line garbage to just say that money flow in, money do something. We go ahead and tell you that this money is only effective when the state has a form of accountability to ensure it reaches the last mile, to ensure that developing countries, where most of the way in which their supply chain works is that they pick a small part of the supply chain, they make it their specialty, and they go ahead and sell this to their local businesses and local suppliers, and all of the downstream stuff only happens on our side because we're able to ensure that that part of the supply chain is flourishing more, because we are able to ensure that the FDI actually reaches because of that accountability. Which means all of the impacts that they wanted to argue on how all these industries get so big and who will be so uncomparative and not deal with them on education don't flourish on their side. Which then means that all of the ROI on education, all of the benefits on healthcare, and the prices for pills going down also accrues on our side. Proud to win this debate.
On the opposition bid to conclude this debate. Here.
Very okay. So yeah, shout out first to obviously you did all my juniors in Delhi who were planning to come but did not come. Especially seniors Mahek, AG, Suryansh obviously for giving up again. Yeah. Also a special shout out to Manik Chowk's Gwalior dosa. Starting my speech, cell count of 3. The biggest flaw in the entirety of government is that they assume the extreme case, oh, government does not have any kind of money to go ahead and fund these kind of public institutions. But that is nagged by their own framing that, oh, this is not existing in just underdeveloped places, but it's probably existing in all spaces. If that is true, governments are likely to have some amount of funding. But a neutral frame here is basically you have some money to build hospitals, some money to build education centers, etc. What this looks like, even if you're not earning money, you get aid from central states. You get money from central resources, from external resources, because of which some amount of money exists. This destroys their first frame. That being said, what I'm going to do first is to explain why safety is the most important things debate, and then take out things from that. Why is safety the most important thing? One, because it's basic straightforward principle. State, you have not chosen to be born inside the state. You were not choosing to born inside Kerala, Gujarat, India, whatsoever. That means this was outside your control. Second, state puts rules for you to follow at all points of time, and if you don't follow these rules, you are likely to be punished, which means you'll be put in jail if you don't follow what has been said, and you'll not be allowed to do certain things, even if you think they're right, and because states think they're too. you have no ability to control what is changing. Even with democracy, it's likely that someone you don't like is probably in power and you can't do anything. What is the rationale state puts behind this? And this is the basic main mistake. Is that we want this because we want to ensure basic safety for every single person inside this state. And this is the first thing the state wants to provide to every single person, which means safety at all points in time is the most important thing in this debate. So Suryansh explains to you why is safety compromised at a point in time to engage in rapidization. Why? Because one, in terms of education, when people are not educated about basic things, they will make mistakes. That looks like men in rural areas thinking it's fine for us to look down on women. It's fine for us to call them out. It's fine for us to abuse them. It's fine for us to keep them inside their houses and not allow them to do things. This is basic. Second, Mahor says that, oh, you don't need education to know your rights. You don't need education to know how to lease your domain. You need that because you don't know how to vote if you're not educated. That basic education is what this model ensures, which is always important. Any kind of education is what leads to this barrier of crime solved. But secondly, crimes happen where higher administration happens because this is happening in specialized regions. And this is something Suryansh explains and he agrees. When you have to develop economically and you are a space where you want to conduct industries, you will not put one resource in Ahmedabad, one in Kolkata, one in Telangana, and one in Delhi. You want them to be together because you want to maximize profitability, maximize accessibility and efficiency, which means it's going to be in special places like special economic zones, like maybe Gift City, which is made here, or probably Noida or Gurgaon, etc. What this means is some places are going to get rapid restoration, other places are not going to get this. Even if they say, oh, no, but cities like Ahmedabad are so safe, because this is one city, go to a village in Kutch, go to a village in Anand, etc. Which means at all points in time, safety is compromised for majority of the region because people think that they are not getting access to the things which government has promised them. They are not getting access to the development because this is only limited to a certain extent on their best case whatsoever at all points in time. Which means people think it's okay for them to commit crimes because everyone commits crime. It's because my father used to do this, my grandfather used to do this. It's fine for me to wear shit in public and let other people see whatever is happening. Which means people will be committing crimes, crime rates will be higher, people will not understand what they should be doing, and basic common sense without this. This means safety has to be ensured. We ensure safety because we tell you that you give them basic healthcare, which is happening in a democratized manner. It's happening for everyone together. We ensure that at all points in time, you are having some kind of education which ensures that, oh, you'll not be committing basic faults like committing crimes which you think are okay, like misusing genders, etc. This is the first thing we've proven. No one engages in this whatsoever on any bench. Secondly, what we tell you is why exactly is this idea of employment, idea of economic growth much better happening on our side. We are okay with the trade-off. We will not be growing at a rapid industrial rate. We will not get a lot of FDI immediately. But it's fine because what we want is a stable space wherein everyone has the ability to get to some place itself. Which means you're not discriminating against some people inside the state and catering to some people. You're catering to them all equally. Which means at all points in time, even if the rate is lower, even if you will get better employment and like higher employment streams later, it's fine. But regardless, this is an even if. Suryansh proves to you, but this is not the case because even though Ojas says that, oh, you will not get employment because you're not educated. We have better reasons. We tell you that there are multiple AI jobs or like, technology jobs which will be going away, which means most jobs to be taken away. And for some reason, both the governments just think that private players are not at all profit oriented. They're okay with just having some kind of ROI and that's enough. But on a comparative, government is always less profit oriented because what they want to do is cater to the people because that's their basic job. The reason they want to earn a return because they want to invest it for public good. And the reason they say that it's going to be corrupt is especially happening in the Gujarat model because you don't have basic education because of which you get corrupt. If you solve the basic problem, the cyclic loop doesn't exist and you will solve all these problems. Let's talk about East Bench one by one. What does OG tell us then? OG explains that, oh, we want to give employment and FDI, and this happens because we give competition. There are multiple responses to this. The first idea here is that, one, they concede that there is no education happening out of the time. But if their own argument is about competition and startup culture, which means you have to democratize them at all the time, which they never explain how is this happening. But secondly, PSPs exist, state-owned enterprises exist to maintain sustainability in all these resources. So a basic idea is done with regards to what you need as basic industries. You don't want to rapidly grow them at all the time and still survive at any point in time. I take out from.
One of the major reasons why crime exists is because people don't have employment. Why are people so transformed by education on their side? I'll still commit a crime if I don't have a job and I need
Bro, so the way societies function is you go from sectors to sectors. So probably agricultural economy is first, then you go into middle sector, then you go to third sector. We are fine with not having the industrialized sector and the most high-paying job. It's fine if people have low-paying jobs because you don't have a lot of resources to spend this money on. You don't have high population coming exactly because medically the health problems increase when industrialization happens. Which means at all points in time, when you're not industrializing, it's fine if you have have lower paying jobs, but people are knowing what to do, which means once they get educated, the chances of you to actually develop industrially is something which will happen in a stable manner in the long term. We'll find a trade-off at any point in time. The next thing which OG is trying to point out is that, that people have more money here and they can use it for better reasons. But I'm not really sure how you're able to afford services which are existent where people have it from certain sections and most of the country, most of the state is not having that. And how is this sustainable? My basic problem here is why is this correct for you to implement as a model and how is it benefiting the actors inside the state? Because what is the reason you want to develop any state? Because you want people all over to have the best kind of lifestyles. I don't think it's fair for you to say that, some people are going to have extravagant lives. Some cities are going to have great lives. A minority of people there will probably be living in good spaces, in safe spaces, but majority of it will be working class, will be working at lower paying jobs. Because at all points in time, government is less profit oriented than a private actor, and they will focus on a democratized manner, which happens in every single space. We take out opening up because they just don't have a comparative. They rely on historical facts and say that because it happened in Gujarat, it will happen. I think government is very pointing out this can play out in a different manner, which is something we logically prove at one time. I think what CJ says is also something which is just irrelevant. They say, last mile connectivity is important, but never prove why that is the case. And there's no reason as to why they prove.
First approach takes hands. Good debate.